Lone Ruin is a roguelike twin-stick shooter releasing on January 12, 2023 on the Nintendo Switch and the PC, specifically Steam. It costs $14.99 at launch and has you digging into a set of magical ruins to see the untold power to... Actually, I'm not sure what the main character wants to do with it. Maybe make the greatest souffle? I don't know. But before I begin, this key was obtained from the publisher for the purposes of review. That won't change my opinion of the game in the end, but you should know that because of FTC guidelines, as well as the whole morals thing, you know? The basic structure of Lone Ruin is as follows. You start the game by choosing one of 8 weapons, where 3 of them are given an upgrade right off the bat. You move from room to room, defeating waves of enemies and staying alive, until you beat the room and get your next upgrade. After around 6 or so rooms, you'll come to a boss, then another set of levels, a boss, another set of levels, and the boss, and the game is yours basically. This is along the same lines of many other games in the genre, but let's get into the details of the gameplay and the combat specifically. Let me focus on the weapons first of all. The weapons do have some variants, from a quick melee slash, to a railgun shot that you have to charge, to a series of bullets, you hold over your head to release all at once. Actually, I want to focus on the difference between those last two, because while your first reaction may be to scoff and say, well that's basically the same thing, Lost Ruin does do enough to distinguish them from the execution and playstyle element that they will definitely feel like different weapons, at least in terms of the controls and the strategy. While some weapons I definitely liked a lot more than others, aka the rail shot is your best friend and will be everything you need and more. It's not like the other weapons can't work as well, but you may have to adapt to each weapon's unique differences, forcing you to throw out preconceived playstyles adapted from similar games. For example, many of the enemies in this game focus on bullets and damage that is a lot easier to deal with at long range. So you may be looking at the scythe melee and go, well, I probably don't want that as a primary weapon, especially if you're overly aggressive with the slashes and keep running out of them. But if you pay attention in how it's implemented and notice that the slashes will cut down bullets, you'll realize that being a bit more patient and attacking just after enemies attack when up close will not get you damaged over and over again. So yes, there are a variety of ways to play here, but where I start to have some reservations is about the enemy variety. Look, there is some enemy variety in Lone Ruin. You have your typical fodder units for basic numbers, your centipede mover unit that will punish you for getting too close, but force precision to take out their particular segments. That feels like 60% of the enemies you'll get. There are others, however, such as this big floppy boy that just jumps at you like a frog pissed off at you, or this wizard that seems to be ridiculously overpowered compared to everyone else. But quite frankly, when it comes to dealing with these enemies, it feels very one note in terms of execution of strategy. Specifically, just keep moving in a circle pattern and firing, getting close enough for your range, and the game sort of doesn't really punish you for doing much more than that. Sure, you've got a dodge that you have to get out of certain situations, but other than that, it all comes down to whether or not you're hitting your shots and you're being overly aggressive. Be a little bit more conservative, and things seem to go well for you. Part of the reason why your strategy doesn't change up that much is the level design. The fact is that the level design does have a few elements that you have to adapt to, in particular the stairs. Some of your shots are not going to be able to go over the stairs, you actually have to get up them, and that can be a little bit frustrating at times. But that frustration is one of the only ones. Yeah, you got pits, you got, these elements that you can fall off the world on, but they didn't really come into play a lot. A lot of the time you had the space to move, you had the speed to move, and the enemies weren't pressuring you in a way that really forced you to deal with the environment. And I think that's one of the biggest drawbacks of the game in the overall picture. Now granted, I played the game on the normal difficulty, and the hard difficulty does throw more at you. But one of the core problems with Lone Ruin is that when it comes to its identity, that element that really stands out, it doesn't have it. It's solid in a lot of ways, and quite frankly, the genre can start to get overwhelming with each game's unique gimmick at times. So a step back into more simplicity could be something that the game could have used rather nicely, which it does at times. I want to clarify that point a little bit more. Some roguelikes, and in particular top-down shooters, overcomplicate with too many mechanics at times. Some of them are fun, don't get me wrong. Some of those games are fantastic. But sometimes the KISS principle does work well. Keep it simple, stupid. And the fact is, you shooting an enemy and you dodging an enemy's fire can be simple in terms of the sort of enjoyment that comes out of it. And I feel like when it comes to Lone Ruin, that's probably the strongest element it has. It may not necessarily be flashy in certain cases, but if you want something that is a little bit more, I don't want to say down to earth, but a little bit more basic, then Lone Ruin is right up your alley, because you're going to get that with the implementation here. But in a genre where it does need some splash and some uniqueness for you to come back, it's hard for me to sit here and get too excited at another run of the game after I beat it. Like, for example, I like the aesthetic that presented in the game's press materials and trailer, and I do think that the lighting and base color design works well to be eye-appealing, yet not get in the way of the action. Yet, with that said, I was hoping that there would be more variety in that presentation as the game went along, and it never really decided to change things up that much, or really thematically push the presentation in any sort of way. Which means that the game was really banking on the different weapons and upgrades to really make each run feel different from one to the next. And here is where I'm being a little bit speculative. When it came to finding new upgrades that I hadn't used or seen before, it felt like there was an invisible experience bar that you'd see in other games that would unlock new ones over time to add more variety to the game. Now, it does help that you do get 2 other weapon slots, as well as some other weapon types that weren't selectable at the get-go that may have non-weapon functionality, like the Berserk spell that allows you to go mad with fire for a little bit. There's some good variety in terms of the accessories that you can find, giving you more health or stronger at low health, but nothing too crazy to really change up runs vastly from one to the next, but can support different playstyles and can be strategic in terms of which ones you get. Because at the end of each level, you do get a choice between 2 doors with different upgrades that you can choose from. So yeah, there's a little bit of choice, but sometimes you don't know what that upgrade is unless you've done a run before. It's the same problem with Binding of Isaac. It's that you don't have the information that you may need. But that's part of the fun in terms of the exploration of all these different types of accessories. Now, I will say that the actual upgrades themselves, the weapon upgrades, the ones that you can get on top of the weapon, can be significant in helping you really expand your strategy, with range extensions or even adding effects like burning to them. They are what you want to focus on in the early going until you get your weapon into a good state. But again, I would have challenged the devs here to go outside the box in some of the implementation. Sure, getting more chains on a chain lightning spell could be useful, but it's been seen before. Why not add an ability to chain enemies together to slow them down, or even messing with enemies around the chained enemies that are close enough in movement? I felt like when it came to creativity, the game didn't play at all with any of the abilities or concepts that it could have, And sadly, that's the feeling I'm really left with after the credits have rolled. At this point in the review, I could probably guess that some people may think that I'm being hard on the game in terms of the whole unique or creative angle. If a game is fun to play and solid in implementation and gameplay design, but isn't unique in any sort of way, isn't it still worth your time in terms of playing it? That a game that I faced no bugs or performance issues with was able to deliver a solid experience, isn't that one that you should be praising? And I get that, I do. Again, while I have problems with some of the repetition here and the gameplay design, it's still fun to play through in the end, so I get that opinion. But I also have to say, without that unique angle, it's hard for me to recommend this game over others in its current state. Like, the fact is, you will always face the same first boss in this game. At least I did with my 15 to 20 hours. When playing through the runs, this tree-like creature just keeps on showing up over and over and over again. And yes, other games do that as well. But if you were to ask me where this game lies in top-down shooter roguelikes in terms of replayability, I'd have to say it's in the lower to mid-lower tiers of that, due to things like the only one boss at the start. And that starts to repeat in every other element of this game in terms of comparing it to others. Take, for example, the music. I'm going to be honest with you, I've heard worse music from other games, but I also somehow am writing this section of the review and am actually trying to remember the music in of itself, which isn't exactly a great sign in terms of music that stays with you. When you have other games with great action soundtracks, this one, again, just doesn't stand out. Just take a listen and hear what I'm talking about. Sound design did seemingly do more for me, as I did get good indicators of what was going on in terms of hits and hit sounds, and the sound that was there seemed to be quality in terms of being able to hear what was going on, clearly. It complemented the action well, and frankly, it was fine for what it was. Take a listen and you'll hear what I'm talking about. Now, as for the story, well, you get a few cutscenes that implies what you're doing, but that's about it. Story is not exactly what this game is going for, and that's clear from the get-go. And sure, other games in the genre don't focus on story as well. Some do, like Hades for example, but some, they just want you to play the game. And sure, you can imply certain things from the enemies and the environment here, but quite frankly, I was expecting more, especially with that first cutscene. It established a couple of things, and I was expecting that maybe it would follow up on that, and it sorta never did. In the end, Lo and Ruin isn't a bad game. In fact, it's a competent top-down shooter that has some replay value, and has more depth in its combat that meets the eye. And to be frank, there's not a lot that I can point to and say for the price, yeah, that's horrible. Sure, some replay value, but I wanted more. Sure, I wanted some story. Sure, I wanted a little bit more variety in my visuals. But I've seen a lot worse in a lot of other games. But here's where the game ends up being kryptonite to my scoring system. Again, for those who haven't followed my channel, my scoring system is a buyability rating, whether or not you should spend your money on the full price of the game. And it does take into account if it's a unique experience and opportunity cost. The base problem here is that, well, for every semi-good or good thing that this game does, I can recommend 5 to 10 others that you probably haven't heard of that may be better bang for the buck in that category. Which, I know, isn't necessarily fair to the game itself. But I hate to say this, it's a dog-eat-dog world out there in the indie space. There's only so much time and money to go around. And when I see games like Metal Mine, which introduce mechanics with mech building to the experience to make it stand out, or the striking presentation of Icy Red and its grapple hook mechanic, I look at Lone Ruin and I don't have anything to really prop up, as you have to play this for one specific thing. And that's why the game gets a 70 out of 100. Niche players may want to take a look at it, even though it barely goes across the threshold, but for most other people, you'll probably want to wait for a sale. But that does not take into account my enhancer system, which takes the more subjective elements of games and tries to match a game to you. If you fall into one of the following categories, add or subtract that score to the main score. If the first digit of your score changes, refer to this chart to see if the game lies in the buyability rating for you. As you can see, there are certain situations where I do think you should pick up the game, especially if you are somewhat new to the genre, but maybe aren't necessarily the biggest veteran of it. That's it for this review, and yes, I know it's shorter than most reviews that I do on this channel, but I felt like I got the points that I needed to across in this review. If you like this review, hit that like button, and specifically, leave a comment in the comment section below of a top-down shooter that you think has been overlooked. Anyway, that's it for now, and as always, keep on gaming.